Right then guys, it's PSL here, and I'm here for the 7th episode in my Power Stages series on Dirt 4. Last episode we discovered that the slowest H2 car on paper is actually the quickest. And whilst there may be on only that particular surface on each car's standard setup and with minimal practice, that's still the end result we found out. In fact, we could well see a very similar story happen here in the H3 category, as once again we've got a mixture of very big, heavy, powerful sedans along with much lighter, smaller and more nimbler designs. So of course the simplest way to organise the theoretical pecking order of these cars is to look at their horsepower per tonne figures. There's quite a difference in the power to weight ratios of all the cars, even more so than we saw with the H2 cars. You've got the very heavy Ford Sierra and the underpowered Opel Ascona, which have significantly less horsepower per tonne than the others. The BMW's power to weight ratio is decent, but it can't compete with the lightest of all the H3 cars, the Lancia Stratos, as well as the very light and powerful Renault 5 Turbo. The acceleration of all of the cars is pretty much exactly what you would expect, judging by the car's power to weight ratios. The Renault got from the start to the bridge in the quickest time in a highly impressive 9.682 seconds. The Stratos is a quarter of a second behind, but still got there in under 10 seconds. Then you have to go back another 0.8 of a second to find the BMW, as its extra weight resulted in the car accelerating much slower than the lighter Lancia Stratos and Renault 5 Turbo. The Opel was less than half a tenth of a second behind the BMW, despite the Opel having a lot less power and a lot more weight than the BMW. And finally, the Ford Sierra was by far and away the slowest, with a time of 11.216 seconds. That's 0.4 of a second slower than the Opel and a gigantic 1.6 seconds behind the quickest accelerating H3 car, the Renault 5 Turbo. So knowing that, not too surprisingly, the slowest car in this category is the Ford Sierra Cosworth. It's got the second lowest power to weight ratio, is the heaviest and the slowest accelerating of all the cars in the H3 category. Because of all that, it also feels very heavy, and because it's longer than most of the other cars here, it's also the least nimble of all of them, which adds to the poor performance of this car. Unsurprisingly, this car does understeer quite a bit, but it's by no means a major issue because the car is so slow anyway. There was a lot of wheel spin at the start of the stage, which does contribute to this car's poor acceleration, at the very least from getting from the start line to the bridge. But despite the car's excessive wheel spin at the start, it isn't difficult to control even at low speeds. In fact, for a car with 300 horsepower, which is the most powerful car in this H3 category, it was surprisingly easy to drive. So the most powerful car in the category is the slowest. Anyway, its stage time was 3 minutes and 7.786 seconds. That's the third slowest car I've driven in this series thus far, and embarrassingly is even 0.2 of a second slower than the Ford Fiesta. That demonstrates more than anything else just how influential a car's weight can be on its overall performance, as well as how much better front wheel drive is than rear wheel drive on a loose gravel surface. The next quickest in this category, by a solid 6.6 seconds over the woefully slow Ford Sierra, is the BMW M3. Now it may be the second slowest car in this category, but I have to say that it is by no means a bad car. Not only does the engine sound great, but the car's straight line performance is very competitive in terms of top speed and acceleration. It does tend to oversteer a lot, but then again, what else can you expect with a 1980s rear-wheel drive BMW on gravel? You can think of this car as a slightly more refined, but also more powerful Ford Escort that we saw in the H2 category. Both are four-door sedans which are not exactly purpose-built to go rallying, but are merely road cars converted into vaguely go-anywhere race-ready rally cars. Both have a bit too much power going through only the rear wheels, meaning they have a very twitchy rear end when going on power. Although interestingly, the Ford Escort, despite being older and less powerful than the BMW, was still quicker than the M3, albeit by less than half a tenth of a second, proving that more power, especially for rear wheel drive rally cars, isn't always better. Also, I should point out that the times the AI did in this car around this stage are ridiculous. Alvarez did a 2-minute 43 stage time, which is quicker than every other car I've driven in this series to date, and possibly could be the quickest time we see all series. Not only is it quicker than every other time I've set in this series thus far, it's also quicker than every time every AI driver, including Alvarez, has set in this series so far. So to me, it seems that this car is unusable for offline play when competing against the AI because they just set unrealistically quick stage times. I don't think it is possible to do a 2-minute 43 stage time, and even if it is not possible. No way is it possible to be able to do it in that car. No way, it's impossible. I don't know how Alvarez did it, but Codemasters, they probably need to patch that. Anyway, going back a bit, and to add more fuel to the fire around the idea that more power isn't always good with these sorts of cars on gravel, the Opel Ascona, which has 40 brake horsepower less than the BMW, was 0.2 of a second quicker around Kangaroo Farm than the M3. This could be partly due to the fact that this car is one of the very few in the H2 and H3 category that can be driven flat out along the start-finish straight, showing it has the suspension to ensure a solid and stable landing over each of the bumps, and ironically, the Opel's vast weight and lack of power also helped to keep the car stable on this section of the stage. To demonstrate the difference in handling characteristics between the BMW M3 and the Opel Ascona, just listen to the difference in throttle application between the BMW, in which I had to feather the throttle to avoid spinning out, and the Opel, which was very easy to drive with only 240 horsepower compared to the BMW's 280. So first up, let's listen to the BMW.
100. Right 5 long, don't cut. Caution, crest, jump maybe. Right 5, don't cut. Left 5, into right 4, and left 3 over crest, don't cut. Into right 5, dip, bump, 100 through dip, and crest, jump.
Now listen to the Opel, and you'll notice that I'm on the power a lot more and much earlier around each corner.
Right 5 long, don't cut. Caution, crest, jump maybe. Right 5, don't cut. Left 5, into right 4, and left 3 over crest, don't cut. Into right 5, dip, bump, 100 through dip, and crest, jump maybe.
So there you have it, that's the 4-door sedan sorted. But much like with the H2 category, the quickest cars are the ones that deviate from that design. Most notably the low-down, sleek and aerodynamic Lancia Stratos, which is about as far away from a 4-door sedan as you can get, or even as far away as possible from a typical rally car design. Whether it be in acceleration, under braking, going around corners, short wheelbase, lack of weight, that is a very good combination. So the Lancia, of course, is going to put in a good stage time. The question is how good?
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Thanks again, Nicky, and away we go. And look at the start from the Lancia Stratos. That was rapid. Already 80 miles an hour. This car is just so quick off the line. But then again, it's got 241 horsepower and it is so light. What do we expect? But I'm sure you'll be able to hear from the engine notes, but also you can tell just looking at the speedometer or even the amount of revs that the engine's doing. I'm nowhere near flat out on that straight. Nowhere near. The car is just so unstable. Partly because it's light. I mean, I think you can attribute it to the extent, or to a certain extent to the suspension, to a certain extent to the fact it's light, to a certain extent the fact it's rear-wheel drive. It was just so unstable on that straight that I had to lift off constantly. But as you can see, we've done the first split, and here is where the Lancia comes into its own. Corners. Because this Lancia, it's so responsive. However, too responsive. As you can see, I did kind of underestimate the car's handling there. Took out a couple of bollards there, but it's actually, it's weird. It's such a strange car because it's almost like it goes exactly where you want it to. But it's weird. It is very strange. I mean, I'm sure it's not like any other car in this game. I think it does take quite a while to get used to, because you just point it in a direction and it goes there. You don't have to wait for the rear to tilt round or anything. It's so different to how every other car handles in this game. It really is. It's too direct, too responsive. One thing I should also say, you'll notice I'm being very cautious around that corner there. That corner I've typically understeered and I've gone out onto the grass. You can't do it with this car. You can't. I had so many failed runs where if you run out wide, because as you may notice I'm sticking, even around that corner, I am purposely sticking to the gravel, because if I go out on the grass edges, that's it, the car goes. This car is very direct, very responsive. The problem is if the rear steps out, like it did there, but only a tiny amount, but if the rear steps out any more than that, it's gone. It's irretrievable. So I guess that's kind of the downside of a car being this responsive and this direct, is that the handling is superb. However, if you get it a bit too wrong, a bit too leery, if the rear goes out onto the grass, it's gone. You're never ever going to be able to retrieve it. But overall, it's a positive review from the Lancia. It's a twitchy car, and sure, out on that straight over all the bumps and jumps, it's nervy. It's a very nervy car to drive, but certainly once you get used to it, it's a very decent car. I mean, I cannot fault the handling. I really can't. It's almost too good. As you may notice, yeah, took out some bollards there, not too surprising. Not a hint of understeer, not even really any oversteer unless you go out onto the grass edges, in which case what do you expect to happen? But look at that, a sub 3 minute stage time and by quite a way, 2 minutes 56.62 seconds.
Great stage, good work.
A sub 3 minute stage time is always good, but to break the magic 3 minute barrier by 3.4 seconds is quite an achievement. But it should be known that this car is certainly not a doddle to drive, as it's got quite a unforgiving handling style. If the rear goes a bit out of line, it's gone, which can be so easily done in a car with such a high power to weight ratio, despite the fact it's only got 241 horsepower, which in the grand scheme of rally cars isn't massively high. But still, make no mistake, it's very refreshing to drive a car which goes exactly where you want it to, with maximum urgency. And that is what the Renault 5 Turbo has got to compete against. And sure, the Renault may have more brake horsepower per tonne, and even more horsepower outright, but it's got to compete against one of the most responsive and best handling cars in the game. The Renault 5 Turbo is hardly heavy, long and lumbering, but can it combine stability, top end speed and cornering ability to beat the Lancia Stratos?
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Thanks again, Nicky, and away we go. And if we thought the Lancia was quick off the line, then the Renault is mind-blowing, because factually speaking, the Renault was the quickest from the start line to the bridge, and already we've got 2 on and past the bridge. Now you'll notice, if you look at the revs, if you look at the speedometer, we're going at a much higher speed along the straight, and also we're putting in more throttle application. We were just going quicker down the straight outright because the car is more stable. And, I mean, I'm not exactly a car expert, I'm not an engineer by any means. And there does seem to be a correlation between the amount of weight that a car has and how easy it is to drive down the straight. I mean, if that's only for rear-wheel drive cars. I will say that the four-wheel drive... I mean, we've driven the... What are they? I'm forgetting the category of car now. The R5, yes, we've driven the R5 cars. They were very quick, very powerful, but yeah, they were four-wheel drive and dead easy to drive down the straight. And it just seems to be that if you've got more weight, maybe it's something to do with the weight, maybe the suspension. I honestly cannot say with 100% confidence. But it seems to be if you've got a bit more weight, you've got more stability down that straight, which the Renault certainly does. And anyway, while I was trying to think of the category name of the R5 cars, we've missed the Renault going around a lot of corners, but we'll have a look at it now. Let's just observe the Renault going around some corners, because, well, we've got this right-hander coming up, which With most cars, I've had to run out wide. As I said, with the Lancia, I couldn't, because if I go out in the grass, it's game over. But as you can see, the Renault, I was able to allow it to run out onto the grass slightly. I mean, the Renault has got a hint of understeer, but it's not distracting, it's not massively noticeable. But compared to the Lancia, anything's got understeer. And in fact, also oversteer, yes. It has got oversteer as well, but that was very much instigated by me. That wasn't just the car being out of control, that was put in by me to an extent. But yeah, the Renault, it's more stable than the Lancia. It's less edgy. Certainly I feel less on edge while driving this car. It's got more horsepower, it's quicker down the straight, it's quicker accelerating, but the handling isn't quite as well there. I mean, the Lancia, it just went round corners. That was what it did that for days. And as you can see, the Renault is good. It is really good, but as you can see, a bit of a four-wheel drift going around that corner, that would have lost the Renault some time. The fact of the matter is that both of these cars are very similar. At the very least, compared to the other cars in the H3 category, they're very similar. I mean, the Renault 5, much like the Lancia Stratos, it's a very light car. I mean, this car's got more power, it's also got more weight. But yeah, the Renault, it's been a very quick car. Sure, some understeer, and in fact going around this corner, yes, some oversteer. Of course, the oversteer is kicked in once again, and that's going to cost it a lot of time compared to the Lancia, and in fact the times will be close, very close indeed. But the Renault has just about beaten the Lancia. Not by much, but it has just beaten it by, what, a fraction of a second. But there you go, the Renault, the quickest around Kangaroo Farm. So there you have it, the Renault 5 Turbo, despite being 11 years newer and having a higher power to weight ratio, beats the Lancia Stratos by only 0.2 of a second around a 3.38 mile stage. The Renault 5 Turbo was certainly a more forgiving car to drive, and in fact is the car I have favoured personally over my time playing Dirt 4. What is very interesting is the range in pace of these H3 cars. The Renault and Lancia see themselves firmly placed in the top half of cars I've driven so far this series, and they're very closely matched, and in fact are just behind the impeccable F2 kit cars, and that is a shock. The F2 kit cars have been the most surprising cars for me to drive, in fact some of the most enjoyable cars for me to drive in this game. I love those F2 kit cars, and for the Lancia Stratos and the Renault 5 Turbo to be just behind those cars expresses better than anything just how good these cars are, and the fact that they're so closely matched and are so high up on the overall leaderboard is praise to how good both of these cars are. But then you've got the Opel Ascona and the BMW M3, which are floating around the 3-minute mark with many of the H2 cars, and the Ford Sierra, which was so heavy yet also so overpowered for a rear-wheel drive car, on gravel at the very least, that it was slower than the R2 Ford Fiesta. But anyway, just to make it plainly clear, if you're deciding over which car to drive in the H3 category, for me, the Renault 5 Turbo is the car to go for. The Lancia is another very strong option, and it has a lot going for it. But for me, the Renault wins every single time.